Thanks, Mike. Thank you. Um, I I I don't want to. I want to obviously on Friday night at services. I don't want to dwell on the negative aspects of this. It's not a good way to go into Shabbat. But um, um,
It's real life.
yeah, but I'm going to say a couple things now, and I'm going to say a couple things during the week that are a little bit more realistic and not necessarily positive. But I'm telling you one right now, which is that just so you understand the what happened with Hamas, it actually what it did is it killed the peace process. It shouldn't surprise anybody.
Right.
But people who were on the left in Israel are not on the left anymore when it comes to the peace issue.
Thank God.
So people in Israel are now pretty much they're all on the side of doing what you have to do to protect the country.
United?
And the country is very united in that way. It's also united in the sense that there's absolutely no way that Netanyahu is prime minister within 3 or 4 months. It's impossible. There's no scheme or way that happens. He's going to be held accountable for some of it, just as Golda Meir was held accountable for the Yom Kippur War. So that's also not something I necessarily want to talk about at Shabbat. I'll talk about it in the briefing, why that's going to happen. The other thing that I'm not going to share at Friday night, because I was a little surprised by this, and I'm going to tell you, I don't know what's going to happen other than the Netanyahu thing, that I'm pretty like 90% sure. I will tell you that I'm 70 or 80% sure, but if I went by what the people told me in Israel, I'd have to say I'm 90% sure that there will be another phase of this war. So everyone, and including me, I was expecting that my trip was actually going to get canceled because there would be a war with Hezbollah.
Yet I hear they just backed out, that they're not going to war against
Hezbollah?
Yeah.
So what's happened, of course, is that there were rockets that have come over, and not just rockets, but shelling from the ground on the other side of the border into northern Israel. Much of the communities in the north on the border with Lebanon have also evacuated. So 20 or 30,000 Israelis from not Sfat, not that far south, but which isn't that far south, it's 20 miles south, but 15 miles south, but like right across the border in Kiryat Shmona and some of the areas that are right on the border, Nahariya, that are like where Rosh HaNikra is, some of those places have been evacuated because they've been hit with rockets and with shelling right over from Lebanon. So there are a lot of Israelis that are also left the north. And I know people, like I have friends in that area who have left the country for now. So America, Europe, they just left. They packed up and left because they assumed that it was going to happen soon. I assumed it was going to happen soon. The fact that it didn't happen led me to believe that it wasn't going to happen. That doesn't mean there haven't been provocations. The issue is Hezbollah has constrained itself to the effect that Hamas is very upset with Hezbollah for not being engaged. You've probably heard that.
Yes.
The Hamas is decrying Hezbollah for not being with them and not being brothers, and just taking Israel on two fronts so that Israel couldn't concentrate on Gaza. So Hezbollah did not do their part. Okay? In their minds.
Right.
I don't know exactly why, but it hasn't. Maybe, again, America warning them, they're being responsible. I don't know. But there have been provocations. So I assumed that it wasn't going to happen. What I've been told by Israelis is not just that they're prepared for it, but they're demanding that it happen. They're demanding that Israel clears out that area. And I'm like, well, what's the basis for that? Well, the basis for it is the United Nations actually, when Israel pulled out of Lebanon 25 years ago, there was a UN agreement that that area south of the Litani River would be free of missiles. There would be no rockets there.
And
There have been. So I said, well, what's the justification? They said, well, the UN resolution. I said, Israel doesn't pay attention to UN resolutions. That's ridiculous. So why take this one? Why make this one enforced? And they said, because we don't want to have Hezbollah have the power to do it.
Right.
So I'm saying, well, okay, but they've had the power to do it. They've done it. The last time they did it, as you know, was in 2006. It was really bad. Rockets were falling really bad. And hundreds of Israelis were killed in the north. So I said, well, it looked like it's blown over a little bit. They said, no, what we're hoping is the Israeli army, once they've finished the majority of the job that they have in Gaza and they've neutralized Hamas, that they will then take those soldiers and deploy them in the north and invade Lebanon and take out Hezbollah's positions up to the Litani River, justified by the UN resolution and the fact that Lebanon has essentially de facto control, Hezbollah has, in the south, and they've been doing this, and they've sent rockets. Currently there are rockets that are coming over, so that like the next time, like let's say Hamas neutralized in Gaza, the next rocket that comes over from Lebanon, that's it. They're going in. So I said, really? I mean, like, you're serious about this? And they said yes, because what they'll do is it's very difficult for Israel, in any country, but especially Israel, which has a huge part of their military as their reserves, that they call these people up. They've been called up. They're on deployment right now. They will redeploy them rather than letting them go home and then having them have to deploy again, because it's very expensive to call the country up into war. And so they'll just do it while this war will be 2 phases. And this first phase comes to an end, and then the other phase starts. Part of me still doesn't believe it, but that's the 20 or 30% that doesn't believe that that's going to happen, because I don't believe Hezbollah really wants it to happen. I really don't. I'm pretty sure they don't want it to happen. How do I know? Because they haven't done much.
Right.
That's how I know. If they wanted to, they would have done it already.
Right.
Doesn't make any sense for them to wait for Hamas situation to die down and then for them to start this, for them to engage it. So that's the thing I'm not going to say on Shabbat, because nobody really wants to hear that there's more stuff coming. And I don't know that for sure. Like I said, I'm not a prophet. I didn't see any top secret information. I'm just telling you that the feeling on the streets of Israel, with both people who are skilled in diplomacy, who were being briefed, who were hearing some stuff, and then also people who are just the average Israeli citizen, just wants this to be over. But when it's over, it's over. And their feeling on the positive side is that because most of these other Arab countries have really not condemned it, and of course are secretly behind the scenes hoping that Israel is successful, that what probably will happen out of this is that they honestly believe, most Israelis believe, and I do believe this, that however this does end, at some point when Israel declares a ceasefire, part of that declaration is going to include recognition by Saudi Arabia.
I think so.
And I think that that's going to be the last piece of this, which is, at least in Israel, gives people hope that this will usher in a new chapter in really being able to neutralize Iran and creating a real lasting peace with their neighbors. Because as we know, everybody knows, Saudi Arabia over the years was one of the major financiers of the Islamic fundamentalism that was so anti-Israel and quite frankly supported PLO and some of the people that have killed us over the last 70 years. So that's the good news. But in order to get to the good news, it's going to require many Israelis think another round of another, that means another
Another war.
few weeks of war, another month of war, and it means almost assuredly Israelis dying both in missile attacks and in soldiers in Lebanon, if that's what's going to happen. Remember, Hezbollah has 150,000 plus rockets. They have a lot more rockets, and they have a lot better equipment than Hamas does. Yeah, Philip.
My question is, was there any discussion about who governs Gaza, assuming Israel eliminates Hamas?
There is. Most Israelis don't believe that anybody there is gonna, whoever's in charge of Gaza, they don't trust the entity that will be in charge. So they don't necessarily believe that there's a good replacement, whether people think it should be the Palestinian Authority, or they think it's going to be a new person, whoever it is. One of the things that most Israelis say is they want there to be a Israeli military presence there. They don't care. As long as there's Israeli military presence, and what they want, the average Israeli citizen, they want a area around the inside border of Gaza that's patrolled by Israel. They don't want there to be outside patrol. They want an inside patrol. That's what the average Israeli wants. They want that in the inside. Well, that means that there's a constant Israeli military presence in Gaza.
So last question then, for Hamas, unless some third country takes them in, this is a fight to the death for these jihadists.
Well, yeah, yes and no, because as you know, some of them are already in Qatar anyways. They're there, they're already there. Some of the leadership is they've talked about is living the high life in these countries anyways.
Yeah.
But that's the same thing the PLO had for years. I mean, Yasser Arafat was gallivanting all around the world in the 70s and 80s, while his people were languishing in other Arab countries. He didn't care. So there's nothing new there. But whatever that new group is that controls it, whatever you call them, nobody in Israel assumes that those are going to be people who they trust. But that was
But when Israel invaded Lebanon, the PLO packed up and went to Tunisia.
They went to Tunisia.
Right. But assuming Hamas in Gaza wants to leave, or they have no choice, who would take them? Or is it just
I don't know.
end game just
I don't know.
fight to the death?
I don't know what the Hamas, like the average Hamas militant, thinks is going to happen. I know that Israel is, the thing about today is that Israel knows who these people are. I mean, they've got photos of them. They've got now videos of them. If Israel has a military presence in Gaza, they're going to kill those people.
Right.
Kill them.
They know it.
Yeah.
But as you saw, they also don't care. They want to be martyred anyway. So it doesn't really, that doesn't answer the question of what happens to them. I did talk to a few Arabs while I was there, because I always want to get their take. So I talked to a couple of Arabs from East Jerusalem, and they're upset about it. They're not happy with it. I mean, obviously these are Israelis that work in Israel. They honestly just want to have a life. They want to work. They want to have jobs. They want to be able to raise their kids and do fun things. And they're glad every day they don't live in Gaza. That's for sure. But I think what's interesting is that, when people look at, I don't know when they turn off the lights and are talking to their wives in bed about what is really going on. Does a Palestinian Arab in East Jerusalem or in Bethlehem, do they turn to their wives and say, "Thank God we don't live in Gaza"? Like, I don't know. Because obviously in Gaza, they've had a lot more autonomy than the people in the West Bank have had, in the sense that they can do what they want in Gaza. They've turned it into a prison themselves. I mean, they're imprisoned by their own people.
Right.
But I don't know if that conversation, if they actually have that conversation. My guess is that there's a lot of other factors that go into play there with, what people's religious outlooks are and what their family structures are like, what kind of money they had before. I know that a lot of the Palestinians just want to get out. They want to get out of the country. They don't want to get out of West Bank or Israel. They want to. The guy who took me to the airport yesterday, the cab driver who's from East Jerusalem, he's from Shofat actually. He told me he just wants to go to Canada. I mean, he doesn't want to go to Israel. He doesn't want to go to Gaza. He doesn't want to go to. He just wants to go to Canada. Joanne.
I missed the first few minutes, so I know you're not going to talk about this on Shabbat.
I'm going to just very briefly, and I'm going to talk about the more positive elements. I told people the most powerful thing that I saw was the, and I'll talk about it more when I do a briefing of it, it was the police station in Sderot, which yeah. Yes. Yeah, we're going to do a briefing night where I just talk about the trip. But this is the Sderot police station now. That's what it looks like today. On October 6th, this is what the police station looked like.
Oh, my God.
That was where 30 Israelis were murdered defending the city of Sderot. That's the center of Sderot. The Israeli police officers and citizens who were defending that place got overrun, and 30 of them were murdered. And the Hamas terrorists that were holed up in there were shooting at the Israelis as they were trying to come into it. It's well, you can see it's a fortress because it's a police station. When you build a police station,
Right.
it's got to be, it's like your fort. Turn this into a fort, into their last stand, and Israel eventually blew it up and had to bulldoze it. Nothing's left. When I was there, these guys here were putting up a memorial. There are police officers who were there. They came down. I posted a picture of it. You saw the picture. I posted a picture of them. These were the guys. They drove down from Akko that day. They drove 4.5, 5 hours minimum
Wow.
from the other side of the country. Akko is the far north. It's by Haifa, north of Haifa. They drove down that day to light a candle. They brought a bucket and they put the candles in there.
Wow.
That's what they did for their people. And this was this spot right up here. I didn't show this picture before. This was where the Israeli snipers were in this window, shooting down into the station. And this is the wall along that was the wall for the building next to the police station. So that's all that's left. So these were a couple other pictures I showed. I'll show you one other picture. This is a picture I showed, but I didn't zoom in on it. So that's one of the buildings that got hit. This is from inside. That's from outside. This is from inside. But I'm going to show you one interesting picture. This is a picture inside the picture that you can't see. You couldn't see unless I zoom in. So I will zoom in. That's Chen. She lives there, and she was taking me around. So here's the picture I want to show you. Let's see. You'll see it better on this picture. So you can see this is the window from outside. Now I'm standing inside it. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to show you something. See if somebody who's paying attention can see what I see here in this picture, what I caught in this picture. It's easier to see right there. See what's in the picture? What's this?
What is it?
It's a sukkah.
Oh, my.
All around Sderot, or Sukkot, because it was the last day of Sukkot. So they left. The Sukkot are still there, all over the place. It's a ghost town with sukkahs all around.
Oh, my.
So you know what the people told me?
What?
They said, we're hoping that we'll be able to light our Hanukkah in the sukkah. That's what they're telling people. So the next month, we hope to be back in our homes lighting our Hanukkah in the sukkah. Sukkah's still standing, and we're going to light our Hanukkah. I don't know for a fact that they're going to be there. I talked to the mayor of Sderot, which is this guy. I posted a picture of him. I met with him for about an hour before I went down. There's Alon Davidi, who's been on the news a lot. This is him. He's the mayor. He's about 46, 47. This is my friend Dan Diker, who's the Jerusalem Center for Policy Authority. Well, he doesn't speak English that well. He speaks English a little bit because he takes people all the time. I saw, who was in Sderot yesterday? Chris Christie was in Sderot yesterday. No, I missed him by a day. So I like that dude, but yeah.
Mossab Hassan Yosef.
Yeah, he's the son of
Interviewed him.
Hamas. Yeah.
Is he real?
Did you read the book?
I didn't read the book.
Read the book. I'm saying, read the book. It's a good book. Son of Hamas, it's called. Mossab.
Yeah.
He was
Son of the founder.
yeah, one of the founders of Hamas, and then he escaped. He became a mole for Israel. He was spying on Hamas for Israel, and then he got out. They helped him get out, and then he escaped. And he lived in San Diego for a while, and now I think he lives in Australia or somewhere. Philippines. He is, but he's not in America anymore. He left.
Well, he was in New York last week.
Yeah, I know, but he wasn't living here before he got out.
He converted to Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there was other stuff going on. I mean, I've read his story and I've heard him speak, and I've never met him. I think I want to be on record as saying this, but I think there's something a little off. Look, how could it not be? I mean, his family has cut him off. I mean, he was raised, according to him, the way he was raised was pretty abusive and pretty difficult to imagine. Then he's cut off from his family. And I can't imagine his life has been very easy, but
It was a fantastic interview.
yeah, well, he's an interesting guy. I mean, he has a viewpoint that he's seen things that most people have never seen. I just don't know. Well, first of all, I'm not saying he's not valuable, because he's valuable from a historical standpoint, but he's been out of it now for 20 something years. So he doesn't know anything about the leadership now. He doesn't really know about how they're operating now, because this is now a new generation of Hamas.
Right.
I don't even think like his father's generation could have even wrapped their head around what went down. But it is an interesting story, and it's a fascinating story. So read his book if you can. It's an easy read, and it's definitely got some interesting elements to it. If you can, try to see like what it's like to escape, that kind of hatred.
Is this the town, the place with our donations?
No, so this is not Be'eri. Sderot is a city. Okay, Sderot is a city with 80,000 people, 20,000 kids. It's a ghost town right now. There's 50 people, a skeleton crew that's maintaining the stuff. I'll talk more about this later, but Be'eri is completely abandoned right now. There's maybe 2 people staying there, and they're only staying there like a couple days at a time. Sderot they'll be back. Oh, that's what I was going to tell you. So this guy here, the mayor. So I said, when are you going back? So he kept kind of skirting the issue, and I kept pressing him. When are you going back? When are you moving back? Because he said, we're not moving back until it's safe. Okay, so what does that mean? I said, so what that means what? That means no more rockets, no more Hamas, no more Israeli presence. I mean, Israeli presence and permanent presence. What does that mean? He goes, I'm not sure yet. He goes, I don't want to say. He really is not happy with Netanyahu. And he's a conservative dude. He was a member of Likud. He was a Likud MP, I think, actually, or he was supposed to be. Anyways, they raise a lot of money. The reason we didn't help Sderot is because, okay, I'm just going to tell you, they're raising $500 million right now.
Oh my God.
500 million. So I said $500 million. He said $500 million. That's how much they're raising right now. Be'eri will be lucky if they get $1 million. I'm not joking. I mean, if they get $1 million, the problem is with Be'eri, which is the kibbutz that we've helped. The problem with them is that they're not sophisticated when it comes to donations. They've never gone to the outside for donations. They're a very socialist group. I mean, these are left-wing socialist folks. They don't own cars. I mean, we're no property. I said, like, did you go back to get your stuff? He goes, I don't have any stuff. I said, but you have like books and you have pictures. He goes, yeah, but now those kind of things aren't important. But he has very little stuff. And the people there, they're not raised with that mentality, or at least he grew up in Barrie. So the issue is like everything in State Road has a name on it, this from Canada, this from Baltimore, like everything has a name in State Road. Barrie doesn't have that. So I said, you're going to have that. You're going to have to start putting plaques up. Because again, this is a communist thing. It's like nobody owns anything. But so it's not ownership, but it's, dedication that somebody put up the money for this or that. So you're really going to have to figure that out. But the problem with Barrie is that people will not be living there for 2 more years. Well, there'll be some people living there. Some people are going to move in as soon as they can, but it's not going to be a lot of people, and they're going to be there to be caretakers. They will move in together or not at all. They are going to move in, by the way. It's not like a question. They are going to move in. I'm going to do a Zoom just with him for us. The guy that I've been working with, Yarnine is his name. We're the same age. His English is pretty good. But he says we're all going to move in together. There's 1,000 people left. A little over 100 people were murdered. And these were people, I can't even describe it. It's literally like a family. So if you have 1,100 people in your family and a little over 100 of them were murdered.
Yeah.
He says, I'm looking through the list of the people who were murdered. And he said, it sounded like the list that I was reading through the names, and there were so many names. He says, it was like our setup for Pesach. I was thinking I was reading the list of who's setting up for Pesach, who's breaking down, who are the people who are coming, who got to be there early. The idea that this was a list of people who are now dead or murdered, he said, I couldn't comprehend it.
Mhm.
So that's Yarnine. And he said, for the first few days, he said we had 6 or 7, 8 or 9 funerals a day. He said, you had to pick one person. It's like, how do you pick one person? I've known some of these people for 50 years. How do I pick? These are people that are like my family. How do I pick one person whose funeral I'm going to go to? So, yeah, that was Be'eri. And we're going to keep the relationship going with them. And but it's much less professional, and it's much less like these are people who've never done things like this before. They've never had to go to they're very self-sufficient people. These are not people that have ever asked for, well, they have a relationship with the government. There's government support, but it's not they're very self-sufficient. They're very self-sufficient. Yeah, Joanne.
Not talking about Israel.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, talking about Israel, but about the march.
Yes.
What did you think of it?
I wish I could have gone to both.
And it was not in the media.
What?
Fox News had 2 minutes, and that's the only station that had anything on what was going on.
I didn't. I know a few people who were there. And you heard what happened to Detroit, right?
Yep.
Joanne, tell them what happened in Detroit.
They chartered 3 planes, and then they weren't allowed to get buses in to go to the march.
What? They weren't allowed? The bus drivers refused to take the Jews to the march.
What?
They were stuck for 3 hours at the airport. That was the Detroit group. Had nothing to do with Detroit. It happened when they were in DC.
Yeah.
They refused to take them. They had to get they scrambled to get taxis and shuttle buses to there, but the bus drivers refused to take them.
Robert, that's a larger.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the discussion of,
It's not relegated to Detroit.
no, but
No,
No, but it just happened, that's all. This
Yeah, it's
just
so
happened.
pervasive that, we're seeing seep to the surface.
yeah.
well,
Who was there?
so that,
What was her name, Alyssa or?
yeah, Alyssa Rosenbaum, yeah.
She's there.
Look, the reason that this story, though, John, became the story was because this was a nexus point of American anti-Semitism with this. So here's what happened. Did you hear about it? So yeah, 900 people that were hired. They hired buses, right? They rented, they chartered the planes. The planes was the easy part. You think that would have been the hard part. They came and then they landed there and then they couldn't get people from, there it is.
The issue. So acknowledged. The ability to keep a conspiracy, right, subverted, very different. Which means they collaborate,
Yes.
right? And so peel back, that's the discussion we have to have as a community. Peel back the layers of that onion is that they didn't even hide it.
Right.
So they conspired, whether it was at the corporate level or the driver level. But my point is, I guarantee you it's not relegated just to Detroit.
No, it was in DC. Had nothing to do with Detroit. This was a DC bus company that decided not to pick them up.
That's what I meant. But my
But I
point
think
is,
it's national.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm
it's
just,
a very broad discussion,
Yes.
right? And I think a lot of people want to talk about.
yes, it is part of what we're going to do. Part of addressing what we're going to do is, what are we doing? So this is part of what we're going to do. And the difference is, my friends, is that thankfully in our community in Santa Clarita, we have a very supportive community.
So we think.
No, John, I can tell you. We will. I'm just telling you, we will talk about it, but you're getting a disproportionate positive vibe here. There are places where it's a lot worse, John. I can tell you again, we'll talk about it, but I'm telling you, the support that I'm getting from neighbors is not what other rabbis are getting from other places.
And I'm getting tremendous support from my neighbors.
Well, they love you, Joyce. That's a little different. Everybody loves Joyce.
Oh, in Michigan, two people are coming and taking their mezuzahs off the door.
Well, Michigan has a huge Muslim community. I'm not going to tell you something you don't know. I know. So we'll talk about it. But yes, I feel very bad for the people.
Hiding their mezuzahs here in Valencia.
Yeah,
or
we'll
in
talk
Santa
about
Cruz
it.
Valley, hiding their mezuzahs because of fear.
And at the homeless shelter, people are telling me how bad Jews are.
So,
They didn't boldly come out now and tell me how bad Jews are.
Okay.
That's good word, emboldened.
yeah.
Yes, that's right.
It's a
They
very
are.
good descriptive word.
That's a good word. Emboldened.
My English, she's pretty good.
So that's about a half hour. It's what I thought we would deal. Like I said, this is the beginning. This is not the end. It's not the end. It's not the end of the discussion. It's the beginning of the discussion. And I promise you there'll be, there is a lot more coming. So the last time we gathered together, which is weird that we were actually reading this last week, because that doesn't even seem possible that was last week, but because literally 12 hours ago I was at the airport, but we were reading the end of Kitavo. Actually, this is the end of Kitavo, but a couple of verses. As I mentioned, the break here is one of those breaks where, how do you break it? And we read about this covenant that we read about and the blessings and curses last week.
Yeah.
And this week we're starting with a new idea. And the Christian scholars who put chapter 29 as the break here is probably, this is an example where I think this is a better break, because this break here seems to be the end of an idea. The last thing we read, these are the terms of the covenant which Adonai commanded Moses to conclude with the Israelites in the land of Moab, in addition to the covenant which they made at Mount Sinai, at Horeb. So that's like a statement. That's the end of that section, right? So this section, though, beginning here in chapter 29, you'll see in a few verses, we get the Torah portion break into what we call Nitzavim. This portion, and I'm not sure how much we're going to read today, contains one of my favorite lines in the whole Torah. And so when we get to it, and I don't know we're going to get to it today, we'll either get to it today or next week, you'll hear why, and some of you will hear it again. But it's really one of my favorite lines of the Torah that really sums up to me, the view of Judaism when it comes to God and the Torah and revelation, if you will. So therefore, it's to me one of the most important lines, and to me, it's one of my favorite lines. I mean, obviously, things like love your neighbor as yourself, and those kind of lines are great lines. And there's, there's some great stories in the Bible. But as far as a line that kind of sums up what our view is on where God is and where the Torah is, it's in this portion coming up. But anyways, this is the last few lines of Kitavo. So this begins, Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, you have seen all that Adonai did before your very eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his courtiers and to his whole country. By the way, an important message that we get throughout Deuteronomy. Remember what happened in Egypt over and over again. And I'll tell you, you're going to see it even into the last line of the book of Deuteronomy. The last line of the Torah is this message is still coming in. Before the eyes, your eyes in the land of Egypt. Now, again, he's speaking to a new generation. So the irony is that most of those people weren't there to see it with their own eyes. Some of them were, if they're little kids, but their parents did. The wondrous feats you saw with your own eyes. Again, those prodigious signs and marvels. Yet to this day, Adonai has not given you a mind to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear. Right? So you don't really understand this yet. You haven't really understood this. I led you through the wilderness 40 years. The clothes on your back did not wear out, nor did the sandals of your feet. So it's not telling you that the 40 years didn't happen. Not only did they happen, but they happened miraculously, in that you didn't have to worry about your sustenance there, right? You had no bread to eat, and no wine or other intoxicant to drink, that you might know that I, Adonai, am your God. What's interesting about that is it's telling us that the manna that we had, and the fact that we didn't have wine and alcohol, should have given us like an elevated stat, like a clear mind, and like we were holy during that period.
And gratitude for God.
You'd think, right? So when you reach this place, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan came out to engage us in battle, but we defeated them. We took their land and gave it to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh is their heritage. So we also had this other victory that we read about in the book of Numbers, which we've read about, which is a testament to God's giving us another miracle, another blessing that we didn't even expect to have. We got that land, we took it away. Therefore, observe faithfully all the terms of this covenant, that you may succeed in all that you undertake. Now, the reason why the Jewish writer said that's the end of the Parsha is because then that goes back to this covenant that we read there. But we read it with chapter 29, verse 9, being the beginning of Nitzavim, which starts with the words Atem Nitzavim. You stand this day, all of you, before your God Adonai, your tribal heads, your elders, and your officials, every householder in Israel, your children, your wives, even the stranger within your camp, from wood chopper to water drawer, to enter into the covenant of your God Adonai, which your God Adonai is concluding with you this day, with its sanctions. And again, what's the repeated word here over and over again?
This day.
Hayom. Hayom, which we've seen over and over again in the book of Deuteronomy as well. This day. This day. And that's the words Atem Nitzavim Hayom. And the portion is called Nitzavim. You stand here, or standing here. Atem is you. But this day. So again, the covenant idea is continuing in this next verse. So it's not like the covenant discussion is over. It's also continuing into this Torah portion, and it's continuing here. So this is the argument where you can make where it doesn't make sense to start a new portion here, because this could also be with the line that came before there, the covenant that you undertake. Well, you just said the covenant again. The covenant right here. So it's still going on, this discussion of this covenant that's taking place here in this moment. So all of this portion to some extent, or not all this portion, but this portion, this part of the portion, all the way back through chapter 28 is all part of this idea of this covenant that's taking place just before the people come in. They have the covenant at Mount Sinai, and then they have this covenant at their entry point as they come into the promised land. So here's what it says. Again, with its sanctions. Now, they have a comma. This could also be the beginning of a new idea to some extent, because here's what it says. In order to establish you this day, again, as God's people, and in order to be your God, as promised you and sworn to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, I think this idea really goes with this next idea, which is, I make this covenant with its sanctions, not with you alone, but with those standing here with us this day before our God Adonai, and with those who are not here with us this day. Now, this is the second best line in this Torah portion, Netzavim. This one is a great line for Netzavim. The other line is we're going to get to is just overall, but this is a great line, and it's a great line also overall too. It's just, what does it mean? I make this covenant with you. Okay, I made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jesse?
I just had a question. I guess that line made me think, what's the Jewish view on the afterlife?
So that's an interesting question, right? Because
I'm sorry.
no, say it.
Because I was under the assumption that there's not necessarily, a heaven or a hell or anything like that, but we're reunited with God's ultimate consciousness, so that he's saying, I'm not making this just with you. It's because our ancestors are with him because they passed and they went back.
So that is the traditional Jewish belief, is that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all of our ancestors are with God in heaven, and that we'll be with them too one day, that we'll be reunited, that those people are there. What? Jewish views of the afterlife?
Yeah.
Yes. So these are standard views, right? These are beliefs that they're there. Part of them are based on this kind of idea, right? That Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still looking down on us. They're with God, they're in heaven, and that one day we'll be with them. And to some extent, there's that idea. What's interesting about this, as we mentioned before, Deuteronomy and the Torah, for the most part, isn't really concerned with heaven and hell. This isn't a discussion about what happens with those guys. It's that because of that relationship that I had with those people, and the fact that I promised them that you were going to be able to have this land, that you're having it now. Then the question becomes, I make this covenant with those who are standing with you this day, and with those who are not with us this day. Now, most of us would say, well, that's our ancestors, right? But maybe it's us.
Future.
Is it the past or is it the future? That's why I said, how do you read this? So that's why this line is such a great line, because it's ambiguous enough that it could mean one or the other or both. Because of the covenant, this agreement, this promise is with the people that came before, because he just said it's with the people that came before. I promised them. I promised them. But if it's for the future, if that means that your descendants are also going to be part of this covenant too. So this is what's really cool, is that, we had actually two brothers that read this in August. They read this portion. Victor and Nate read this portion, and I gave one of them this portion to read, and then one of them the other line. That's a great line. But when you think about this, when you read this and you think about it with a bar or bat mitzvah kid and say, this covenant is with you, because it says right here, those of you who will maybe be there in the future, you. So atem netzavim hayom, today you stand as part of this covenant. So there's very few lines that you can have at a bar or bat mitzvah where you're going, oh yeah, that's exactly what's happening right now. So it's a pretty powerful line for us understanding our place in the covenant. But again, you could say it's about the past, but maybe the reason that he said the past was because that's the past and this is the future. So it's pretty wild to think. And again, let's assume the Deuteronomy was written in the 7th century. Let's assume that it was written during the time of King Josiah. That means that 600 years later, 600 years after Moses, the Jewish people still felt that the covenant applied to them at a time when the Babylonians are sitting right on the other side of the river, ready to come through at any given time and destroy it. And they couldn't really do anything about it. I mean, some people said they could, but obviously, as those who've been with us on Tuesday mornings know, Jeremiah told them they couldn't withstand it. Ezekiel got exiled and was telling them, you're lucky you've been exiled already. They were telling him, you can't stop the Babylonians. So if this book implies, and based on what we read last week with the blessings and curses, if those people wrote that knowing that that was happening, all I'm telling you is writing this, knowing that is even more unbelievable to me. You know, some people will want to know, well, but if Moses said it, then that's prophetic. Okay, fine. That's true. That's pretty amazing that Moses knew that that was going to happen. But if God can tell him the future, then it's not really, he's just stating a fact. If Jewish people living 600 years after Moses, say it again, if they wrote this knowing the situation that they were in and still wrote it, that to me is more amazing. Because that's telling people that don't give up faith, that we will come back, that this is our land. And guess what? What's even more amazing is that 2,600 years we did that. That's what's even more amazing. So that was amazing. And then take it another step, that we lived through that ourselves, that it actually came about again.
In our lifetime.
So
I guess that's what scholars say a lot that makes the Jewish idea interesting, because before that, he doesn't say, no, I'm giving you this land specifically, because as you said, the authors would have been like, okay, well, we're about to lose it. It's this covenants of the authors in 600 BC were like, it doesn't matter if we have land or not, we've still been chosen, so the possibility we come back to land, but we don't need it.
well, we can survive without it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would like it. We would like it. Yes.
Like our people without a homeland are still a people.
Yes.
So again, if you take most ethnic cultures and local pagans at the time and move them to a different place,
It's
they
done.
wouldn't be what
They
are.
weren't. There isn't one. The reason that there isn't one is because there isn't one.
'Cause they're, like,
They never
they
happened.
Never
They
happened.
moved Englishmen to Africa. They became South Africans. They weren't British people. They changed their identity.
Yes.
They also became Americans.
Yeah, they became-
Forget South Africa. No, I know the point is true, Jesse. It's even more true when you think that we live in one of those countries. We live in one of those countries where the people stop being British.
Right.
Yes. Yes, we live in one of those countries. Absolutely. Good point. So that's why I say, okay, for people who are looking for a miracle, that's the miracle. And there's actually several miracles there. So, well, what we dwelled in the land of Egypt and that we passed through the midst of various other nations. And you've seen the detestable things and the fetishes of wood and stone and silver and gold that they keep. Perchance there is among you some man or woman or some clan or tribe whose heart is even now turning away from God, Adonai, to go and worship the gods of those nations. Perchance there is among you a stalk sprouting poison weed and wormwood. When hearing the words of these sanctions, they may imagine a special immunity, thinking, I shall be safe, though I follow my own willful heart, to the utter ruin of moist and dry alike. Now, you're going to see the note here says, again, it's just an idiom. It's a way of basically saying, I can get away with this. I can get away with not worshiping God. God won't know. Adonai will never forgive that party. Rather, Adonai's anger and passion will rage against them till every sanction recorded in this book comes down upon them. And Adonai blots their name from under heaven. As for such a clan or tribe, Adonai will single it out from all the tribes of Israel for misfortune, in accordance with all the sanctions of the covenant recorded in this book of the teaching, which is again, B'Sefer HaTorah Hazeh, in this book of the Torah, B'Sefer HaTorah. So is it just this book of the Torah? Is it, we've talked about that before. Is it book of Deuteronomy? Is it the whole Bible? Well, again, if you mess up, the punishment will be for an individual, for a family, maybe even for a whole tribe. That's pretty serious. And later generations will ask the children who succeed you and foreigners who come from distant lands and see the plagues and diseases that Adonai has inflicted upon that land, all its soil devastated by sulfur, salt, beyond sowing and producing, no grass growing in it, just like the upheaval of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which Adonai overthrew in fierce anger. All nations will ask, why did Adonai do this to this land? Wherefore that awful wrath? So when all the curses come about, right, people will look at this place and it'll be like Sodom and Gomorrah, and that they'll be like a wasteland. It'll be like salt. Nothing can grow there anymore. And people will say, why did God do this? Why did God let this happen to his land, right? They're going to ask. And they will be told, and again, other nations and your own descendants, your children, they will be told, because they forsook the covenant that Adonai, God of their ancestors, made with them upon freeing from the land of Egypt. They turned to the service of other gods and worshiped them, gods whom they had not experienced and whom God had not allotted to them. Right? They were worshiping other gods. Gods that they had not experienced, and that's what it's going to say several times. It says, again,
Interesting. Imagine saying God allotted other gods.
right? So let's see if there's a note here. Well, it's mentioned elsewhere too in Deuteronomy chapter 4, which seems to imply
Them other gods.
he gave those other nations other gods,
Okay.
or at least he allowed them to have other gods. Yeah. Whom God had allotted to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's weird, right?
I never
Yeah.
thought of that concept.
Yeah. Well, that's the idea that in Deuteronomy that people still have this idea that there might be other gods. There's just no other God for you, which is, no matter what, hard for the Israelites to take. Look, it's the understanding of whether Jews at this time were truly monotheistic, in the sense that, did they believe that there was no other God? Or did they just believe there was no other God for you?
Did they think they had a special God?
Yeah.
There are others, but we have a special.
Yeah. So there are people who say that we have a special relationship with God and we're not supposed to have any other gods but that God.
That's what it said, there are no other gods for us.
Right.
Correct. But they're being there. The problem is did they believe that those other gods existed or not? And that's where you get into arguments about that, where it seems that we know that by the prophetic period, so by the time we get to Ezekiel, for example, that we're reading, or Isaiah, that by the prophetic period, the people are saying, no, there's no other God.
Right.
Those are all illusions. That those things are false. They're not real. Now, there seems to be that understanding here, right? Because he says here that they have fetishes of wood and stone and silver that they keep, detestable things.
Right.
So are they detestable because they're of other gods, or are they detestable because they're nothing? Yeah.
Aren't we talking about a lot of people at this time has household gods?
Yes. And this is what they're having an issue with, right? They don't want people to have those household gods. They don't want them to have fertility goddesses in their possession anymore.
I mean, you have like your god of the kitchen.
Yes, but the problem here is, if God's saying that you just don't have any other gods, but look, it could be that, again, the idea, look, Deuteronomy has a very famous line about this, right? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. God is one. There's only one God. Now we assume that means that there's only one God for everything.
Right.
It doesn't actually say that. It says you only have one God, which might have been hard for people to understand.
And the commandment says you shall have no other gods before you. So
which
what's that?
seems to imply that there are other gods. You're just not supposed to have it. Now, we understand it in a certain way because we live in a monotheistic society where we don't have neighbors that worship other gods. But if everyone is worshiping other gods, is the concept, part of the argument is, was it just too hard for people to wrap their heads around the idea that there are no other gods? Now, and then eventually Judaism kind of came up with the idea of saying, no, there are no other gods. We better tell people there are no other gods, because if we even give them an option that there are other gods, they're going to worship them.
Right.
So that's part of the problem.
And at that time, didn't they sacrifice some children?
Correct, but couldn't,
That were wood and fetishes and stone.
yes, so the requirements for those gods were pretty bad too.
Yeah.
But the question of whether, part of the argument is, could people wrap their heads around the idea that there were no other gods? Did they believe that? Okay. Did they believe there were no other gods? And then on top of it, is it showing an evolution to some extent of monotheism, of true monotheism?
But did they sacrifice their children to those other
Yes,
gods?
the Israelites did, and that was what got them into trouble. That's what got them in trouble.
I was gonna say it's an exact counter to the idea of paganism at the time, because even the Hellenists who came way later, where we were ancient history to them, they made gods in their own image, because Zeus looked like them, and they go, oh yeah, Zeus, he lives up on a mountain and he throws lightning when he's angry and he really likes women. It's like, yeah, that's me. That's what I do. I picked a nice house on a hill. I like really pretty women and I get angry and throw things around too. So like, and then you take that and say, oh, he does the one thing, right? The thunder and the lightning in the sky. And then you have another guy beside him and he controls the sea. He does that thing. There's that, which is very materialistic and it reflects humanity. Whereas now there's this group of humans who are saying, no, there is one thing that's created everything. You cannot understand it. And it doesn't even have a form or a name.
Mhm.
That's an exact counter to everything that comes now.
Correct, but
Even the basic.
So Jesse's right. So the argument, one of the arguments is that people needed to take this in little pieces. They had to evolve to it. So the idea that they would have one God and only get to worship one God, and then they started giving up this idea of any other existence of gods. There were no other gods, and therefore it's of course we only worship one God because there is only one God. Not that we only have one God, but that there is only one God. That next step, some people believe there needed to be an evolution. Other people said, well, because people just couldn't handle it. The other thing is, again, was it a natural evolution, or was it, and look, we don't have an answer. Like, part of the problem is that, like one of Freud's theories when he started talking about religion is that we actually stole the concept of monotheism from the Egyptians. That's his theory. Freud's theory is that Moses was an Egyptian prince who took Akhenaten, took Akhenaten, the pharaoh's god of Aten, took that concept of a sun god and made it the god. I mean, his idea, where Freud got that from, is this idea that Judaism must have stolen that idea, must have borrowed that idea from somebody. Somebody had that idea, and then we took it. We know that the Egyptians had it around that time. But look, the Bible says what it does. I can tell you it is an argument amongst biblical scholars. There's no consensus on this. Sure, but Atenism happened, and then of course King Tut, who we know a little bit about, he undid that. He brought the priests back. So his father, Akhenaten, had gotten rid of those gods, freaked out the priests. They hated him, probably again killed him, installed a 9-year-old King Tut as the pharaoh. He only lived 10 years. And once he was dead, they had gotten back into power, the priests, and then they were able to bring back their religion and be back in business. But yeah, I mean, the theory is that Egypt had a revolution of religion around the same time as we left Egypt. Anyways, the point is we don't know for sure. And we don't even know from the Bible. Like I said, there's not a consensus. Part of the argument, by the way, on this, which kind of I was privy to when I was in college and studying this, part of the argument, and part of, some people say, one of the anti-Semitic issues here was the idea, and I don't buy that it's anti-Semitic, but The people who said it believe it. If Jews were not really fully monotheistic until the time of Isaiah, which Isaiah is clearly monotheistic. Isaiah says there are no other gods. Jeremiah says there are no other gods. If that is the case, then Jews were not monotheistic until 700 BC. They weren't monotheistic during the time of Abraham or Moses. So they weren't monotheistic 1300. They were monotheistic 500 or 600 years, truly monotheistic 500 or 600 years later. The argument being that that's much closer. It's not that much older than Christianity. And for some people who say that Isaiah, for Christians who believe that Isaiah is also talking about Jesus, that concept of monotheism doesn't come about until there's also a concept of messianism. That's a level that I think is insane, but I understand where it comes from because you make that connection and then you make that next connection. But I don't really care. I mean, if people are going to argue, look, we don't know. I haven't seen conclusive evidence either way. If Jews were not truly monotheistic until 700 years BCE, who cares? I mean, it means that we were monotheistic 700 years before Christianity and 1300 years before Islam and a lot longer before Europe became Christian and, whatever. So the Vikings were still pagan when Muhammad lived. So just remember, they weren't Christian until the 900s. So all I'm going to say is that these are weird arguments that, are historical arguments that we don't have conclusive proof on. And I'm just telling you, I haven't seen it, seen the arguments. I understand it. I've read the text. You've read the text. You can make your own judgments. I don't think it's that big of an issue, but some people, it's a big issue. Some people, the idea that we didn't have that concept of God right away, that's a big issue for them. It's not for me, but so why did God do this? Again, he got upset with us. Adonai was incensed at the land and brought upon it all the curses recorded in this book. Adonai uprooted, and it says again, this book, Sefer Hazot. Up here it said Sefer HaTorah. There it says Sefer Hazeh, this book. Adonai uprooted them from their soil in anger, fury, and great wrath, and cast them into another land, as is still the case. Well, that seems to imply they're already exiled. Or Moses is saying, you're going to be exiled. But that's kind of a line that when they're saying this, they're in exile. Some of them are in exile. Concealed acts concern our God Adonai, but with the overt facts, it is for us and our children ever to apply all the provisions of this Torah, of this teaching. So God knows what's in someone's mind, but things that you see people doing, we've got to enforce it. If people are thinking, God will know. But if they're doing, you and I know, and we got to take care of it. So that's an interesting line, and obviously one that leaves us with the understanding that we can't know what people are really thinking. But if they're doing stuff, we have to be responsible for it. So again, it seems pretty clear that they're talking about the idol worshiping issue, but some people apply this to other stuff too, right? Take this and extrapolate lots of things from the Torah, which is basically that God doesn't hold us accountable for our thoughts. But God does, and we have to hold people responsible as a society for their actions. Okay? So now we get into chapter 30, which again, I don't really know how you break it, but you've read 28, 30, when you get to about 30 verses, maybe it's a time for a break, but I don't know, because this continues this idea completely. when all these things befall you, the blessing and the curse that I've set before you, and you take them to heart amidst the various nations to which your God Adonai has banished you, and you return to your God Adonai, and you and your children heed God's command with all your heart and soul, right? Another phrase that we get throughout the book of Deuteronomy, b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha, and another idea that we have throughout the Torah, your children. Your children. Then your God Adonai will restore your fortunes and take you back in love. God will bring you together again from all the peoples where your God has scattered you. And there is the hope for restoration, that you're going to come back. Even if your outcasts are at the end of the world, from there your God Adonai will gather you, and from there God will fetch you. Doesn't matter what part of the world you go to, we're going to bring you home. And that is, again, what happens when Israel was established in 1948. We brought Jews from around the world and made sure that they could come there. And the word there is yekabetzcha, and that is the root for kibbutz, a gathering. That's where the word kibbutz comes from a gathering together. In this case, it's the gathering together, kibbutz galuyot, the gathering of the exiles. And that's, there's a lot of streets in Israel called kibbutz galuyot, which is the gathering of the exiles, the ingathering of the exiles. It was considered to be, again, what God promised, bringing together the people, and God will bring you in. Your God and I will bring you to the land that your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. And God will make you more prosperous and more numerous than your ancestors. So not only will you come home, but you'll do even better than they did. So not only do you get to come home, but you're going to come home and eventually be more successful. Now, this happened when the Persians let the Jews come back. This actually did happen. It did not happen when this was written. That's for sure. It hadn't happened yet. First of all, you can tell, well, can't tell, but it's kind of telling you that it's a little open. But of course, as I said, people have said this is what happened in the last century. It still happens, that people are coming back to the land of Israel from every corner of the world. So, for people who haven't been to Israel and haven't seen Jews from Ethiopia walking the streets, it's pretty wild, right? It's a pretty wild thing to see. The last trip to Israel that I had, I met somebody that I had never met, a Jew from here before. I'm going to show you a picture. This was a pretty cool thing. I'll show you. In Jerusalem, I had a chance to take a picture with this dude. This is a Jew.
Oh,
This is a Jew from India, but he's from a community that's right on the border of Burma. They're called B'nai Menashe, and they have, in the last 20 years, thousands of these guys have made Aliyah.
really?
And I saw him, and I'm like, "You wouldn't happen to be B'nai Menashe?" He goes, "Yeah, how'd you know that?" And I'm like, he was working in this restaurant. I went there Sunday. I was hoping he'd be there, but he might have been called up into the army. He's in the military now, but I mean, he's of that age, so he might have been. So the B'nai Menashe been brought to Israel. They believe that they were Jewish. We don't know, based on their DNA, they're not, but they believe that they are, and Israel, they had stories about them being one of the lost tribes. and they went through conversions, and thousands of them had been brought to Israel to live there. So he's one of those guys. But there's not many. There's not many B'nai Menashe. It's another one of those communities like the Ethiopian Jews that became or decided they were part of the lost tribes, and so they're the children, they believe, the children of Menashe. Yeah. There's actually better cases for other groups being the descendants of the lost tribes, but those are people who we don't have any proof of, and they still have been accepted as members of the tribe to some extent, members of a tribe. So there's actually the Lemba in South Africa actually have DNA,
What does
and
their
they haven't
DNA
been
show these people? Nothing.
not Jewish. But the Kohanic gene has been found in the Lemba in South Africa. 60 Minutes did a story about them a few years ago, and they actually are further south than the Ethiopians, and somehow they have Kohanic DNA, and they believe that they're one of the lost tribes. So some of the Lemba there is some work that's been done with the Lemba, bringing some of them to Israel, helping them establish synagogues in Zimbabwe and South Africa. But yeah, there's potentially millions. Some, but not many. I've talked to them. They're not like in a rush to come to Israel, but they're more interested in kind of like developing and understanding what their community is like. And then we have the community, the Abu Yudaya in Uganda, who know that they weren't one of the lost tribes, but they've become Jewish. There's thousands of Abu Yudaya that have become Jewish in the last few years in Uganda, and some of them made Aliyah, and some of them are practicing Judaism in the middle of Africa right now.
Wow.
So they actually went through a conservative movement conversion. They've had a couple of their rabbis have studied here. One of them came to our synagogue years ago, Rabbi Gershom. He was in the valley. He was doing an internship there at Shomrei Torah, and yeah, there are communities around the world that are now doing that. Look, there was a community in Russia, the Subotniks, that were Sabbath keeping Christians who decided to become Jewish, and they made Aliyah. Actually, one of Ariel Sharon's grandparents was a Subotnik convert. So some of these people have actually gone through conversion. We had one 2 months ago, a community. I'll show you right now. This happened, and I've talked to these guys, and this happened one state over. How did 21 Messianic Jews in Sholo decide to convert to Judaism? This is a true story. I mean, I've talked to these guys. This is the community in Arizona. And there's Rabbi Andy, who's a friend of mine. He's a conservative rabbi in Scottsdale who went up and worked with these guys. They all converted. They went through the mikveh over the summer. Yeah. Interesting story. So it's happening here in America too. Actually, one of the other people who helped do the conversion is this dude back here, Andre, who used to live in LA, grew up in LA. He's a convert to Judaism himself. He's the head of the religious school at the conservative synagogue, Or Zion. He's studying to be a rabbi now too. But that's Andre Ivory. Really nice guy. So yeah, this just happened. I mean, this happened in August. So this is a community of 20-something people that all went through conversion. So there's Andre right there. And there's Andy. So yeah. Gosh, not only is Andre a black convert to Judaism, he also plays hockey. It's like, man, you checked every box of you went against every stereotype possible, didn't you, Andre? Playing hockey, man. He's really into hockey too. He grew up and he was from LA. It's not like he was from Canada or Minnesota. The guy was from LA. Really nice. Yeah, and he's living in Arizona now. It's like you're making it hard for yourself. But he's a super nice guy. So yeah, it's happening. It's happening in America too. Anyways, pretty wild. So maybe this is happening now. This prophecy might be happening now. And when you look at Israel today, it's very hard to see that this country that's become very prosperous is maybe the fulfillment of a lot of stuff. Then your God Adonai will open up your heart and the hearts of your offsprings to love your God Adonai with all your heart and soul. And there it is again, b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha, in order that you may live. Leman chayecha. So that's the beautiful ending to that phrase too, which is not just you're going to love God with all your heart and soul, but you'll live. Leman chayecha, because this is the way of life. There's a lot of different ways to translate that. But in order that you may live is probably, what does your translation say, Glory? I bet yours has a better translation.
God will circumcise your hearts. Heart, all your soul.
Yeah, you see? Not that you may live, right? But that you will live. So that's why I like that translation better. Not you may live. Leman chayecha, so that you will live. Mary, is that what yours says? Yeah. That you will live. That you may live. I mean, I don't like the may. It's not really, you'll live. Leman chayecha, for your life. Because that's chay. That's how you're going to live. So it's a great line. So yes, your translation has the more literal translation, which is the King James, which is that you will open up, and they even have a note here, circumcise. So, right, that's what yours says, Mary. So umal Adonai, the word mal is like the word milah, like brit milah, like a moil. It means circumcised. Now we understand this in this translation that we had. It's not literally that your heart gets cut, but we do have this phrase that we have, and we have it in the books of the prophets too, that your heart will be circumcised, right? That the foreskin of your heart will be removed. And the phrase essentially is telling us that, and again, it's not your heart, it's your mind, it's your heart mind combination, right? It's your mind, your knowledge, but also your rational thought. It's not just your emotions, right? And it's, I mean, we just keep translating it as heart, but that's not really. Does yours say heart though, Glory? Did it say heart? Circumcise your heart?
Circumcise your hearts and the hearts of.
Yeah, it used the heart translation, but again, it's like freeing it up. It's like cutting off the hardening around your heart, which is also sometimes what a phrase seems to be. That part of your heart that's not allowing it to grow. Again, it's not your heart, it's your mind, it's your experiences of what's going on in your because what it's doing is it's allowing you to love God with your heart and with your soul. So your God Adonai will inflict all those curses, the ones that were happening to you, upon the enemies and foes who persecuted you. You, however, will again heed Adonai and obey all the divine commandments that I enjoin upon you this day. Right? Asher Anochi Mitzvah Hayom, same phrase that we have in the Ve'ahavta. And your God Adonai will grant you abounding prosperity in all your undertakings, in your issue from the womb, the offspring of your cattle, and your produce from the soil. For Adonai will again delight in your well-being, as in that of your ancestors. Since you will be heeding your God Adonai and keeping the divine commandments and the laws that are recorded in this book of the teaching, once you return to your God Adonai with all your heart and your soul, right? And again, you're going to be heeding the Torah, your tishma, you're going to hear, you're going to listen, like in the Shema. You're going to keep the mitzvot, right? And what's interesting about this is, again, this is written in this Torah. Is it this book? Is it the whole Torah? Not really clear, but it definitely seems to be in the understanding of what this word Torah means, this teaching. So we got to it. We got to the line. So this is what we're going to finish with today. This discussion of what this teaching means. So we know that it's going to be part of your return. Right? It's part of your opening up your hearts and your souls. It's going to be your connection, this book. It said it over and over again. HaTorah Hazot. It says the Sefer, this teaching, this book. This is the line. Surely this instruction, HaMitzvah, which is why it's capitalized, which seems to be, again, the general instructions, not one law. Surely this instruction, which I enjoin upon you this day, is not too baffling for you, nor is it beyond your reach. And here's the phrase. It is not in the heavens that you should say, who among us can go up to the heavens and get it for us and impart it to us that we may observe it? Neither is it beyond the sea that you should say, who among us can cross to the other side of the sea and get it for us to impart to us that we may observe it? No, the thing is very close to you. It's in your mouth and in your heart to observe it. See, I set before you this day life and prosperity, death and adversity. For I command you this day to love your God, Adonai, to walk in God's ways, to keep God's commandments, God's laws, and God's rules, that you may thrive and increase, that your God Adonai may bless you in the land that you are about to enter and possess. So let's just take a look at that phrase. Lo bashamayim hi. The Torah is not in heaven, right? Lo bashamayim. You do not have to go up to the heaven to get this rule. You don't have to travel across the seas to get this rule. It is in your heart, right? Beficha ulevavcha. It's already in your mouth and it's already in your heart. You don't have to go anywhere else to get it. That phrase, lo bashamayim hi, is the phrase. This is the phrase that I love so much. Because what Judaism is saying is that the laws that we have, the way that we have to live, the secrets to life are not in heaven. Now, some people would say, okay, well, that kind of gets back to what Jesse said, which is the focus of Judaism is not in heaven. But here it's clearly talking about the law. You have it. You have it. There's nothing more that I need to give you. You have it. You now have it. And again, what's so critical about this phrase is that now God is essentially turning it over to us. At this moment, God is saying to some extent, and when people say, why are there no more miracles? Why does God not do anything anymore? Because there's at least this possibility that God doesn't need to do anything anymore because we now know the rules. The rules were given to us as a backdrop of our exodus and our return back to the land. And then as we, to some extent, at least by the author of Deuteronomy or by the time of Deuteronomy, the lessons of you not keeping the law are now in your mind too. You know what happens if you don't keep it. You've seen it happen. Now, the way that this is given to us is you should never see it happen. But if we follow history and the documentary hypothesis that it happened, it means even more so. You know what will happen. You saw what happened when we didn't keep the law. So when we come back and get another shot, let's do it right this time. Doesn't matter. When people ask, what is the Jewish take on revelation, on miracles, this might be the most important word in the whole Torah. There are not going to be any more miracles. God is done revealing because, and again, now you go, well, what about all the prophets? You can make the argument by the time this was written, we already had Jeremiah. We already had Isaiah. But that's not even the point. Isaiah and Jeremiah are not there to teach us law. There are no laws in the book of the prophets. There are no new laws. At least in our rabbinic conception of what the laws are, they're done. There are no more laws after this. Deuteronomy is the end. There are no more laws outside of the Torah. Every law that we have as Jews has to be derived up to this point. There are no more laws coming your way. You have it, which means there's no need for revelation. There's no need for me to mess around with the world anymore because you have it as it is right now. You know, and you've been told, and you've seen it. It's been proven to you. So there's no more. Lo bashamayim hi. Now, how do I know this? Well, even if I didn't know that this is what this is about, there's Rashi's commentary, right? So, I'll show you. Actually, I'll have to show you the more famous one, which is not here. That's another discussion in the Talmud about it. I will show you the phrase, the most famous commentary on this phrase, right? So I'm going to show you the rabbinic commentary, which again, some people would say is, I'm going to show you up right now. So, let me put it up here. Here is the story in the Talmud.
But that phrase is only in relation to the laws, right? It says this instruction.
Yeah.
It's not baffling, it's not beyond reach, it's not in the heavens. Right?
Yeah.
So that would mean if there were new prophets, they wouldn't be trying to revise or reform the law.
Correct.
They'd have to be enforcing it to the letter.
Yes. And the rabbis who we follow, their understanding, but even the Sadducees, even the priests would have said, if it's not in the Torah, it doesn't exist. And the Pharisees probably had to say the same thing. And you know who else had to say the same thing? Jesus. And the reason why Jesus says in the Christian Bible, I've come here not to change one word, not one jot or tittle, is so that the people who followed him in his day would not say that Jesus revealed anything else. Now, of course, you and I would say, but that's not what really happened because Christianity created a new covenant. But that's different. That's not what Jesus said. That's not what his words were. And obviously, that's why some Christians have decided we better start following the mitzvot because Jesus didn't say he was there to change the mitzvot. That was Paul who said it. Jesus didn't say it. So that's why you got more and more Christians putting up mezuzahs and celebrating Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and eating matzah at Passover. Because this line, came out, it's in the Bible, we're left with it, but by the rabbinic period, let's take a look at it. Because this is the famous scene in the Talmud. Again, maybe one of the most famous scenes. What's weird about it is you wouldn't know that it was going to be one of the most famous scenes based on what it's discussing. Because what it says is there was an oven of Achnai. And again, what is Achnai? Who is the name? Well, it was an impure oven. It was an oven that became impure. So the rabbis are having a discussion about what's kosher in an oven. If an oven is rendered impure. It's a ridiculous, to some extent, discussion. It's one of those typical rabbinic discussions where you're going, who cares about this? But they're going to make the most profound statement. Here's the line. The sages said, on that day, when they discussed this matter, Rabbi Eliezer answered all possible answers in the world to support his opinions, but the rabbis did not accept the explanations from him. After failing to convince the rabbis logically, right? Rabbi Eliezer was genius. He brought all these arguments. They rejected them. The rest of the rabbis rejected them. Rabbi Eliezer said to them, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, this carob tree will prove it. And the carob tree was uprooted from its place 100 cubits. Some say 400 cubits. And the rabbi said to him, one does not cite halakhic proof from a carob tree. You can't do that, Rabbi Eliezer. You can't make a tree fly and prove your worth. You're the worth of your argument? So we don't prove from that, right? Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, the stream will prove it. And the water in the stream turned backward and began flowing in the opposite direction. And they said to him, one does not cite halakhic proof from a stream. You can't change the course of the river either, which is even more amazing. So he's doing these miracles, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer then said, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, the walls of the study hall will prove it. And the walls of the study hall leaned inward and began to fall. He brought in the building on top of them. Now, this is crazy because he's basically saying, I'll destroy the whole damn academy. I'll prove to you, and I'll do it by crushing us. And think about what that's actually saying, by the way. Rabbi Yehoshua scolded the walls and said to them, if Torah scholars are contending with each other in matters of halakha, what is the nature of your involvement in the dispute? Which is basically saying, God, stay out of it. The Gemara relates, the walls did not fall because of the deference due to Rabbi Yehoshua, but they did not straighten because of the deference to Rabbi Eliezer. They still remain leaning, which is a weird explanation for why their study hall is messed up. Why is it messed up? Because these rabbis got in an argument. They made the walls collapse, but God left them just like that. It's an explanation for really bad construction. But it's a beautiful story, which is that the rabbis argued over it and the walls responded. It's not over. Hardly is it over. Listen to this. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the halakha is in accordance with my opinion, heaven will prove it. And a divine voice emerged from heaven and said, why are you differing with Rabbi Eliezer as the halakha is in accordance with his opinion in every place that he expresses his opinion? Why are you arguing? God says to the rabbis, why are you arguing with Rabbi Eliezer? He's always right. In court, he's right. Right? That God now actually comes out and says, listen to Rabbi Eliezer. And what did the rabbi say to God? Rabbi Yehoshua stood on his feet and said, Lo bashamayim he. The Torah is not in heaven. What is the relevance of this phrase? It's not in heaven in this context. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, since the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai, we do not regard a divine voice. As you already wrote at Mount Sinai in the Torah, after a majority of you have to incline. Since the majority of rabbis disagree with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, the halakha is not ruled in accordance with his opinion. They quoted the Torah back to God. They said, Lo bashamayim, you already said it's not in heaven anymore. It's with us. That means we get to interpret it. We get to tell ourselves now what you meant. And why? Even more important, we follow the majority opinion on it. You can't now tear this thing down because of your opinion, which, by the way, I don't want to get into it right now, but it's a good lesson to some of our people in Congress right now, too. Seriously. There's no question. They're already saying he's always right. The rabbis say he's always right. Now, we're not done with Rabbi Eliezer. But the problem is at the same time that Rabbi Eliezer was telling them, I'm right, you're all wrong, what else is happening? There's a band of people that are saying that Jesus has told us what we're supposed to do now. And the rabbis are probably saying to themselves, well, wait a second. If every guy following another guy says we have the new rules, we're done. We have to follow the majority opinion. The opinion stands with the rabbinic court now. It doesn't stand with one individual, whether it's Rabbi Eliezer or it's Rabbi Jesus or it's Rabbi John or whoever else. We can't split apart when anyone says the law is with me. And by the way, it doesn't matter if they can do miracles. It doesn't matter. So this also might be, to some extent, a statement about not just Christianity, but any movements at the time that were charismatically led by somebody. We're not done there. We're not there yet, because you haven't even read the kicker to this. Because all I've showed you is that the rabbis quoted the Torah back to God, saying, Lo bashamayim he, and on top of it, we have to follow the majority. Okay? So they quoted two things. They quoted the first thing, God, which is you can't tell us what to do anymore because you already told us what to do. You can't add to it, God. Sorry, you've told us that. You told us that.
Why can't he amend it?
He can't, because he already said, Lo b'shamayim he. Now, you know why he can't. Because if he can amend it, or if Rabbi Eliezer can now say this is what his interpretation is just by himself, the religion's done. There has to be a majority of people deciding that way. And they did. They constantly did. That's what the Talmud does, is it keeps these opinions. But they can't have a guy, remember what he did. He was prepared to bring down the walls on top of himself to be right. And like I said, there are a few people that are doing that right now in our country. Here's the first kicker. What's the point here? Years later, Rabbi Natan encountered Elijah, the prophet, and said to him, what did God say at that time? What did he do at that time? Rabbi Yehoshua, when Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Eliezer got in this argument, Elijah said to him, the Holy One, blessed be he, smiled and said, my children have defeated me. They've triumphed over me. My children have triumphed over me. Netzocheni benai. And he says it 2 times. God says, my children have defeated me. And he's not sad, by the way. It says the Holy One smiled when he said that. Not because, again, that his kids didn't do what he said, but because they used my own words and proved the correct answer by using my words. So God smiled and said it, which is an amazing understanding of what the rabbis thought that they were doing, which was they definitely thought they were following God's word. And they also believed that when they did it together and they came up with a majority opinion, that God was happy with it, even if God would have said, well, maybe that's not the right answer. And remember, they're arguing over an oven, whether an oven is kosher or not. It's not the end of the world, right? But the bigger context, the bigger issue is one that's really important, which is we believe that God isn't going to amend these things anymore. And if you can't find a basis for it in the Torah, it might be a nice idea, but it ain't Judaism. It's not part of our tradition. If you can't ground it in the Torah, if you can't trace it back to the Torah, we don't buy it. It's not a law. It might be a custom. It might be something fun to do, but it's not halakha. It's not the law. It's not halakha.
What's the next sentence though?
We're going to get to it. By the way, you understand why this whole story works with the Elijah part, because Elijah didn't die, right? He goes back and forth. He's in heaven sometimes. He's on earth. He goes back and forth. So he's with God sometimes. So when a rabbi talks to Elijah, one of these rabbis in the stories, right? He's talking to Elijah because Elijah goes back and forth. Elijah's in heaven sometimes. So Elijah will know these things. He knows these things. Rabbi Eliezer was excommunicated. He was kicked out. So,
We should have known that.
yeah. So, yeah. So this is one of the most famous, stories in the Talmud. It's one of my favorite stories in the Talmud. And it's all based on this phrase, Lo b'shamayim hi. The Torah is not in heaven, what we just read.
If it's Talmud, does that mean it was like an actual discussion that happened? Or is that just like a fable?
Well,
Like, were there actually rabbis who were with Eliezer who wrote down that entire story after it happened? Or was it just, hey, let's make a metaphor?
so the people who wrote that story definitely believed it happened. They believed it happened. They believed that there was even proof that it happened in the walls of the building, because this is the story that they told of how it happened. Look.
Talmud at the time was like published, like the late people could go in.
It could have been written 200 years after, right? So the story after it had happened. These guys live about the 1st century of the Common Era.
What I'm saying is that the Talmud is written and it's available to lay people, right? Like the normal Jews in that community could have gone to their temple, taken the Talmud and read that story, right?
Well, we did.
That's what I'm saying, because that would make it a real story. Then if a normal layperson came in there.
The question of
and said, hey, there was no library that.
the question of how much longer afterwards this was read, That's difficult to know. It could have been written. It could have been, look, the part of the Talmud that it's from, which is the Babylonian Talmud, they weren't even living in that area anymore when when that was written. But was the oral story there? Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure the oral story was there. Again, whether it happened or not, the audacity of that statement is what's so important, right? The idea that Jewish people have this chutzpah of us being able to tell God, you can't change the rules. This is the statement of literally us telling the rest of the world, yeah, we know what we're supposed to do now, and even God won't interfere anymore. We basically told God, we get it, we understand what we're supposed to do. Remember, this is 600 years after the exile now. This is during the Roman period. And not only in the Roman period, it's after we were exiled again. But it's this idea that, look, we know what we're supposed to do. We know we know what the rules are. And if we follow the rules, we're going to live. But the idea that God is going to reveal a whole new set of laws, you can't, that won't work. We've got the laws.
So it'd have to be a rough understanding of the law, yeah, because they amended it or understood it in a different way.
Which is why the
But it
Talmud
was
is,
still according to Torah.
the Talmud is 72 volumes in the full Babylonian Talmud is 72 volumes. It's 50 times larger. I mean, the amount of pages that there are, it's 50 times larger than the Torah, than the Tanakh, than the Bible. Not 50, but 30 times larger. I mean, it's so much bigger because the commentaries go on and the discussions, and we're going to look at those. But I'm telling you right now, the audacity of that statement is what leads to Jews being able to say for the last 2,000 years, we have the rules. And why does God no longer appear and do things like that? Because we don't need to be coached anymore. We don't need somebody to interfere with us and do that anymore. It's that level of being able to say, well, I know what my parents want me to do because they taught me, and I'm an adult now, and I'm now responsible for following the rules. And if they're not here anymore, and when they go, I still have their voice in my head. I still know what they want me to do because I paid attention and I listened and I wrote it down and
Well,
I remember.
Yeah, like it's a different thing, because like your parents would say, oh, I want you to be successful, and they would assume that means, doctor, right? It's like the default. But then if the kid grows up and does a different career, he's like, I'm successful.
Well,
I did what you said.
there-
I can be a doctor technically.
there is,
I'm still
Jesse,
successful.
there is that, but even more important, and you'll understand this, God willing, one day when you're a parent, you don't care so much what your kids do for a living, but you really do care how they behave and what they do with their lives and how they treat people. So what happens is that as a parent, you know that your job is done when you don't have to interfere anymore and fix their stuff. So at this point, the Jewish people believe that they've grown up enough that God doesn't have to school them anymore. So when the Torah tells us such and such a thing happened, to some extent it happened because the Jews needed another wake-up call. They needed God to kick them in the butt again, and they needed it. And that's what a parent does when they come and rescue their kid. So if you don't have to rescue your kid anymore, then you're done your job. You're like, you know what? The kid's now on their own. You know what to do. I know that if I'm not here, they're still going to make good decisions. And that's when God laughs and says, my children have defeated me. He's essentially saying, my kids now know enough that they know even when I'm not needed. So that's when they say to God, you can't do this anymore, they're basically saying you can't screw with the system. The system's in place. And now we're running the show. And if we don't run the show, there's not a whole lot. You messing around again with us. Look, I heard somebody really famous say yesterday, why did God not stop October 7th from happening? Right? And I hear that, and it's like, the same reason, why did God not stop the Holocaust from happening? I mean, that to me, like, we've had that discussion. There's people who, it's not like that discussion, I mean, it happened 85 years ago, but it's not a legitimate question, really. I mean, I get where it comes from, but the Jewish answer we've had for 2,000 years when these people wrote it, which is, God's not going to stop this stuff from happening. The Jewish people know. It's our job. You can make the argument it's humanity's job to know. We've all been exposed to the Bible. I mean, the people that were responsible for initiating the Holocaust, not even kill everybody, but the Nazis were schooled. They had 1,900 years of Christianity by that time. They had the Bible. I mean, it's not like they didn't know the rules. So people, they know. I mean, they know. They don't want to follow it, then consequences are ours. But God's not going to stop it anymore. That's my take on it. I mean, I don't understand, like, the other alternative is that, it's all random and it's all accidental anyways. But if there is an order to it, and God essentially did get involved and doesn't get involved anymore, the answer is lo bashamayim he. God isn't in heaven to do this kind of stuff anymore. That's not God's job. It's not God's job to interfere anymore. So
Are we gonna have a discussion about why the Jews are hated year after year after century after century? Why are we hated now? Why is it growing now?
well, I would say that I think there's definitely an uptick in it, but I don't think it's growing. I think it's come from various places, but we'll definitely have a discussion about it. It'll be part of our discussions in the future too, is that, I mean, to me, there, at least in the world that we live in and the world that most people live in, and I don't know about everywhere in the world, but at least in Europe and in America and in Israel even, there's really three forms of anti-Semitism right now. There's the Nazi, neo-Nazi, whatever white supremacist stuff that has been around for a long time, which is primarily, exercised by, nut jobs in Idaho and other parts of, whatever. I mean, wherever they are, they're in our backyard too. I mean, they used to be based in Acton, by the way. But not all of them, but there was a pretty big chapter of white supremacists in Acton. There's two forms of it that kind of are in the same place, which is the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic side that is both virulently murderous, which is the Hamas Iranian type, and the type that's also predominantly on the left, which is the anti-Israel stuff that you see in colleges, which is primarily associating Israel with oppressive, the oppressor versus the oppressed, in the world. So those are the three forms of it. I mean, the other two that are connected now are the Hamas and the ones you find on the university, but they come from slightly different places. But those are the three types of anti-Semitism that we primarily encounter. I mean, that's the oppressed oppressor one has some origins in the Nazi ideology, and the Jews are the source of power and oppressed, but it's now taken on a life on the more liberal side. But it's on both sides, so both on the left and the right. But the virulently anti-Israel murderous rampage that we saw that's from a different place that most of us aren't going to encounter. But it does exist here. It's the one I'm most afraid of. I mean, if you ask me, which am I most afraid of? It's probably that, me personally. It's a Hamas lone wolf, someone with an ideology, not Hamas, but Islamic, lone wolf person. That's the person I'm most worried about, personally. I mean, not everybody should be worried about it. I'm worried about that. As rabbi of the synagogue, that's what I'm most worried about. There have been other times when that was not my biggest worry, but that's my biggest worry now, because I think it's only a matter of time before we start seeing some of that in this country. So.
I want to ask you about something you said, disturbed me actually.
What?
You said God does not perform miracles anymore?
Not on a global level.
Not on what?
Not on a global level, right?
Okay, and now because of the elite death, we thank God for the.
No, there's daily things that every moment we breathe is a miracle.
Okay.
But
Okay.
but God intervening in a miraculous way, coming down from the heights to stop a nation from attacking us, that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened.
Not parting the waters.
Correct. And that we understood that God didn't stop the Romans from killing us 2,000 years ago. God didn't stop the Babylonians from killing us 2,500 years ago. God doesn't do that anymore. Why? Because we know how to stop that. We know how we're supposed to stop that. So, and again, it's not our fault. We're not held responsible for the evil of the world, though some Jews say we do. I disagree with that a lot, but there are some Jews who believe that we are responsible for it. But I think that's blaming the victim, which is also something that we do. But there's not that much of that going around today, but there is a little bit. There's people who blame the Israeli government for failing it, but I don't know. I don't like those. I always hate that. That's a blaming the victim issue. It's like, telling a woman who's being abused it's your fault. I hate that. I mean, I really hate that. I really hate that, by the way. It really gets under my nerves that people say that. And that's why I compare it to that. It's comparing to a woman who's being abused and saying it's your fault. You stayed in that relationship, or you should have fought back, or, I don't like it. So it makes me, that's probably angers me the most when I hear Jews saying that we asked for it or something like that. I don't like that. That's the argument that we should have been better prepared for Hamas. I mean, it would have been good if we were better prepared, but it's not our fault. You don't blame people for being killed like that. I mean, if you do, there's something off with you. I mean, that's my.
Should have known more of what was going on in Gaza.
Joyce, it's worse than that. There are people in Israel who are saying he knew that it was going to happen. He let it happen.
In order to have a war.
In order for there to be a war, and more importantly, in order to unite the country and to get them off his ass.
Sacrifice.
It makes, guys, I don't want to talk about it because it makes me really angry, and I don't like it. I don't like it. And there's no evidence for it. And the idea that people I don't like blaming the victim. I know it comes from a source of frustration and anger and deep sadness and helplessness, but it's not right. And it upsets me because, I mean, you can disagree with Netanyahu. You can say he's done bad things or he's taken advantage of things and whatever. But the idea that he somehow collaborated and allowed, that to happen, I mean, that's such a horrible thing to say. And again, it's blaming the victim in a way, like the conspiracy that would have had to happen in order for that to, I mean, it's astounding that people would say that, but they are, and they're saying it in Israel too. They're not just saying, I mean, they're saying it more in Israel than they are saying it here. So, I don't know. What are you going to do? It's just sad. So, yeah, that makes me more sad. I'm already sad, and you're making me more sad by saying those kind of things. All right, folks. We will see you on Friday. We will be talking about some of the responses that we're going to do, some of the things. Actually, John is helping on some of it. I have a conversation tomorrow We're gonna be doing a Krav Maga class ongoing here to do some self-defense too. We'll have a lot of stuff that we're gonna be working. And we have a group now, every Sunday morning, we have a group now of Jewish mothers that are meeting here. It's actually open to Jewish parents, but I think it's only moms that are meeting to talk about supporting each other with what's going on right now. The Jewish support group. And eat for TBA, that's right. Tomorrow night, CPK. Does everyone have their flyer? It's a good reason to eat. All day. All day, that's right. Go there for lunch. Thanks, everybody. Good to see everybody. Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you.
If you're watching from Washington or Texas, sorry, you can still go to CPK, but I don't think we're getting any money for it. Bye. Bye, everybody. Bye.